Hello and welcome to Center Stage, a series brought to you by theWORKBOOK, spotlighting the most innovative people and technologies shaping the future of film and television. I'm your host, Trevar Fox, and today I'm joined by Schneider, American film producer, executive producer, author, critic, and founder of the independent production company Spooky Pictures. He's been involved in several film franchises, including Paramormal Activity, Insidious, as well as the films Split, Glass, Knock at the Cabin, and Late Night with the Devil. Stephen, hello.
Hi there. How are you, Trevor?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be here.
You're in Ireland right now. What are you up to over in Ireland right now?
We are test screening a movie that we made last year called Hokum, with an Irish writer-director, Damien McCarthy, and starring Adam Scott. And yeah, we are about to, give it a moment of truth.
Amazing. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I love Adam Scott, by the way, Severance and Step Brothers, and he's hilarious and an incredible dramatic actor. So that's exciting.
Yeah, we are very happy and fortunate to have him. And one of the ancillary pleasures or joys of working in the low budget genre space is, I'd like to believe that many, if not most, actors have a horror movie in them. And I see it as part of my job to try and, give them a horror movie or, scary film to be in that fits the bill, because these guys have to be playing in the space. They have to really feel passionate about it. It means that we really need to have great material to attract them. So it sort of sets a bar.
Do you find that it requires a certain skill set? Do you think it's just like anybody can, like a great actor can jump into horror, or do you think it's sort of like?
No, I that's it's a good question. I don't know. I think that I'll say this much, like there's interesting commonalities between horror and comedy, right? They're
Exactly. The tension and release of both.
eliciting visceral emotional responses and setups and payoffs, things like that. And so a lot of actors who have been reared in comedy, I think, certainly have the toolkit, to really emote and to play in the horror space as well. So that much I believe is true.
Right. I mean, Jordan Peele, I think, said that the only difference between the two genres is the music, essentially.
Right.
That's like,
Right.
so I think they're very translatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can only imagine Adam just crushed it in that. Did you love growing up watching horror films, or was that something that you kind of grew into as you got older?
I got into horror in a sort of serious way. I mean, I grew up watching, I was a cinephile from way back, and grew up, watching movies all the time. But horror in particular, I kind of got into in college, as an undergrad. There was some course on like American horror of the 70s, and it was looking at the sort of social, cultural, thematics of independent auteurist horror in America from that decade.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of interesting film criticism written about it as well. And I got very sort of intellectually stimulated by that. And I can be kind of obsessive about this stuff. And so I sort of did a deep dive and found, again, 1970s American horror, in particular Wes Craven, George Romero, Tobe Hooper, guys like John Carpenter, and Cronenberg, for kind of so incredibly interesting there, both again on a pure spectacle level, and also in terms of the deeper, meanings. In that, I fell in love with the genre.
Favorites from that time? I know Texas Chainsaw Massacre stands out to me as one of the scariest and like kind of the most real.
I love all of I mean, not all, but I'm such a fan, in general. I mean, even like Last House on the Left, is a very disturbing, unpleasant early Wes Craven movie that I love because it's so fucked up in a good way. The Cronenberg stuff, Rabid and Shivers, the early ones, I also really love. And then Dawn of the Dead, one of my all-time favorite, the original Dawn of the Dead. I could go on. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
they're just they're really remarkable documents again because they are um, really exploring stuff that was going on in the time period, but doing it in a way, and that's my favorite thing about genre cinema is, when done thoughtfully and with passion and all that, and with integrity, it's like a way to engage with very serious, important things in the world, but in an entertaining fashion. So it's not pedantic and it's not pretentious. That sort of combination of being easily digestible, but also sort of deep is incredible to me. It's always been, the draw.
Like Romero making his film about mindless consumerism, essentially, and the American Zombie being a statement about that, correct?
All of that, exactly. Also, I was a film student then, and so the criticism and the theory behind the exploration of these movies was as interesting to me as the movies themselves, right? There were some really famous, incredibly brilliant film theorists and philosophers, Robin Wood out of Canada, Noel Carroll, and a few others that blew my mind because they were deep thinkers that were talking about these pop cultural texts, and it was like just an amazing thing to me that you could take something that was meant to be or appeared to be disposable and treat it with reverence and with incredible respect. So
Do you think that there will ever be another time where films are regarded with the same respect as the 1970s? Do you think there will ever be a reverence for film in the same regard?
I don't know enough about the state of like film theory and criticism today to say that with any sort of authority, but it's hard not to be cynical about the state of movies as an art form. But that doesn't mean, even if the trend is towards something that is more homogeneous and yeah, less diverse, less, interesting, less authentic and independent, that doesn't mean that there can't be and there aren't individual voices that are always breaking through. And there's also, I guess, on the other side of it, this incredible democratization of filmmaking through, the YouTubers and new technology that allows people to pick up cameras and make, tell these stories in a cinematic way. So I guess there are arguments to be made for both sides, and I would love to believe that, that as an art form, there's still plenty of opportunities to advance and therefore new eras of greatness to write about and think about.
So the first film that you ever produced was Paranormal Activity, which was made for an original budget of $15,000 and it grossed $194 million, giving it the highest return on investment of all time. That still stands to this day. That's incredible. What did you see in this film that was so interesting to you at the time before obviously it was a huge success?
I love being asked that because it's very simple. It First of all, that's a specific kind of producing because it's a movie that I found and it was already made, and collectively a bunch of really smart, thoughtful people helped to enhance it. But really, Oren Peli, the writer, director, original producer, this was his baby and brainchild, and I was fortunate to get a look at it early, and it scared me, and that's the criteria, the number one criteria.
Right.
I don't know that there should be another one, but there are always other considerations. But yeah, I got it as a directing sample and watched it without any advance knowledge about, what it was about or anything. And it worked. The movie works. it draws you in. The characters are authentic. The situation slowly evolves and becomes increasingly fantastical, but it's done in such a thoughtful way that one's belief is suspended, and that's the key. So again, simple and easy are two different things, but this was pretty simple. Like,
Mhm.
got watched the movie, fucked me up. When I watched, I took some people, and fortunately for me, the people that I told um, trusted me enough to watch it themselves and had the same basic response, and we were all together able to do some amazing things with it, you know.
After the success of the film, you've spoken about how it brought personal challenges. Are you able to elaborate on that? And how did that period shape the way you work today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got over my skis because um, even the second movie, or another, I think it was like the second, another early movie of mine was something called The Devil Inside, which was also a film that was given to me after it was made, right? It was sort of mostly complete. And so I think frankly, look, people in the industry thought that I was good at picking. And that's a wonderful skill to have and it's a wonderful thing for people to think that you're good at. And um, I didn't really know anything about actually producing movies. I just knew, again, how to identify stuff that I thought was effectively frightening.
Right.
Um, and so I think what happened is um, as a person who wants to please others and was sort of desperate to make a living and had a lot of stuff swirling around me, I think I just got really, I think I presumed that I knew a lot more about how to be a producer than I did. And, it took a while for me to, I think, fully sort of get my head around that and try and, sort of fill out the other skills that, to try and understand all the different components of producing.
This having such a huge hit right off the bat, I can imagine why that would be kind of daunting to like go into it, and then there's an expectation that that's going to be the case perhaps every time as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it for sure. And look, LA, there are a lot of temptations and all that kind of stuff, and the normal shit that people go through. But fortunately, that whole experience, in the long run, was really good for me.
How did you end up meeting M. Night Shyamalan, and how did that working relationship begin?
I have a very close friend and someone who used to manage me named Stuart Madishall, who um, was in Shyamalan's world, um, and he and Knight had an idea to make a found footage, or actually more like a mock documentary horror movie called The Visit. And Stuart introduced me to Knight, who was interested in hearing my thoughts about, again, my experience working in that very specific subgenre. I think he was curious to know if I had any thoughts about it, and we got on very well. I revere him as a human being and obviously as a filmmaker, and so it was incredibly exciting for me. And my thing that I like best is to work behind and with, to some extent, incredibly creative people, and to see how I can be additive to their process and help them to achieve their vision, right? I don't write or direct. I'm not interested in that for whatever reason. It's not, but I was like I was a book editor, and I'm someone who really enjoys getting into other people's heads and trying, again, the fun is to try and understand intention, and then with love, give notes and thoughts, right, on how to help that creator achieve that or improve on what they're doing on page, and then they either take it or leave it. But that's my experience with Night over the course of half a dozen movies or so. It's been just an incredibly exciting and fun part of my own path.
It's interesting also that you both hit home runs on your first time up to bat. His with The Sixth Sense and yours with Paranormal Activity. Though you must think similarly, and you both have similar experiences with that.
I love that. I'd love to believe that we could be compared in that way. I mean, all he is the writer, director, auteur behind his, Sixth Sense, and I was a little tiny piece of paranormal, but certainly. And the other thing is for Knight, he's also sort of a prodigy. I mean, he was, in this unbelievable place in the industry from the time he was a very young man. I only even got into film producing after I had this whole other career as an academic. So there's some big, obviously massive differences, but certainly, yeah, having something that is anomalous in its success. We both had those experiences, and I know they have a profound effect on.
Yeah. I love that you have made so many films, and I hope to see more. I watched a bunch of them just to refresh myself on them. I'd seen almost all of them anyway, but I watched Split and Glass and The Visit and Knock at the Cabin, which I hadn't seen before. So you have great chemistry, obviously, and I love to see it.
It is all him, but I have to have been part of that ride. I have learned so much from him about storytelling. There's a profundity to how he approaches it. He also, he's really spiritual about filmmaking. It's, it's, dare I say it's his religion. I don't know if he'd like that, but like he embodies what it means to be a modern day auteur. And I could go on and on about it because it's been such a joy for me, again, to be around that kind of brain.
He's like a hyper creative. He's constantly writing, constantly directing. So I've noticed that across those films, Paranormal Activity, also Insidious, The Visit, Knock at the Cabin, there's often a theme of the family under siege. Do you see this as a conscious interest or perhaps a theme you find yourself drawn to?
I mean, look, that's a theme that is endemic to the horror genre, is the um sort of complications and potential destruction of the nuclear family collapse. So it's, I think, again, because it's part of the DNA of the genre, it wouldn't be surprising that you'll find it in a lot of my movies. But also for me personally, I think I tend to gravitate towards stories that are relatable and not, it's like I don't have a lot of stuff that is like outer space horror, like sci-fi, or horror that takes place in exotic locations. I don't tend to gravitate towards that stuff as much as stuff that starts out in what for me is a very relatable, grounded, environment. And so that's probably why you'll find a lot of movies have that set up in my own sort of library of stuff.
I've noticed also that many of the films confine characters to tight claustrophobic spaces, homes, cabins, and basements. I guess that's also quite relatable, the isolation and the entrapment that makes it effective.
There's that. Then on that note, there's also a pragmatic element because I'm very much focused on making these movies at a certain price point that allows for them to the rate to help me get money to make them. It helps if they're cheaper than other people's, but I can still make them well enough that they compete with bigger movies, right? And so, it's not like I'm looking or only want things that are, minimalistic or have one or two characters in a tight space, but it does make it easier, right? If there's a limited number of locations and limited number of actors, and you can keep it confined. That just makes them easier to mount financially.
Right. Like a Reservoir Dogs type thing. One
Yeah.
location, essentially one, two locations, keeping it very, yeah, simple. So I've noticed that Night often blends psychological realism with supernatural and fantastical elements. As a producer, how do you help balance that delicate line between credibility and spectacle?
For me, it goes back to what I said about wanting to always give feedback that is honest and constructive, but also working within the sort of creative parameters that I'm being given. And so, look, we could talk about the themes in M. Night Shyamalan's work because they are there for sure. Um, uh, but I think, when I'm giving him feedback, it's taking what I'm seeing in front of me in that particular script and just running it through my own matrix or metric or whatever it is of, is this the best version of itself, or do I have any thoughts on how it could potentially be enhanced? And then I'll always give what I would call sort of the bad idea, the bad version of what is hopefully a good idea, and then let him or the person who's the actual writer or creator come up with a good version of it. I'm not interested in solving the problem. I'm interested in identifying the uh, the spot where there might be an interesting alternative, you know?
Mm. And M. Night Shyamalan is typically receptive to your feedback. Obviously, that's why he enjoys working with you. You're able to give him bad versions of the good ideas, and he's able to run with them, and he's receptive to that.
Absolutely. I think because he's super confident in his own storytelling prowess and artistic integrity, I think that is what allows or enables him to be open-minded and even humble when it comes to hearing other people's thoughts or comments or feedback. Again, we're all human and there are ways of delivering notes. Um, some people do it with more sensitivity and thoughtfulness than others. But again, something I've learned from Knight is that, you know, a good idea can come from anyone,
Mm.
where at any time, um, if your antenna are sort of open. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's been that dynamic between us has been really enjoyable.
That's awesome. I mean, similarly, I mean, John Lennon said he got inspiration from a cornflakes commercial. So, I mean, it's just coming from it's everywhere, and you have to be open to it. So you've been involved in both micro budget phenomena like Paranormal Activity and larger studio projects like Glass. How do you navigate the tension between creative freedom and commercial expectations at those different scales?
I have a lot more fun making the smaller ones. It's just inevitable that the bigger the budget, the more oversight you're going to get. And that means, again, more cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
And that means that the problem isn't with having multiple voices, although that can make for some challenges. It's more that there are often, when you're making movies at a bigger price, budget, that the executives and people that are overseeing it inevitably have slightly different agendas. They have their own sort of bosses and people to answer to. And so I think there's an sort of an impurity that can seep into the creative process.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that just, makes it less fun, more pressure. Um, I much prefer to make movies in where the original filmmakers really and the producers for the filmmakers have the creative controls, um, and we're able to take a little bit more risk and really try and be singularly focused on achieving the vision of the main creator, better or for worse. That's cool.
Yeah, without diluting the creative vision, absolutely. Too many
Yeah,
fiction can definitely make things wonky. Got too many people trying to have their finger in the pie or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And again, it's not even that so much as like they are conflicted often in ways that they might not be fully aware of. But that conflict, again, in terms of like making sure that something is sufficiently marketable or that done for a certain price or whatever it is, um, that can infect the thought process, arguably. Right. So again, my point is that these executives I'm referring to are many of them are incredibly smart, incredibly creative, and wonderful, but um, structurally they're compromised.
Audiences today are more media savvy than ever. What still scares people in 2025, and how do you try to stay ahead of audience expectations?
Look, that's sort of if I really knew that, I'd be. It's like that. That would be like knowing the score of the football game before it's played. I think that what I'm saying is you have to be fresh. The ideas have to feel, people always want things that feel new and different, and surprising.
Mhm.
And it's about execution. Um, my point is, I think I don't think that there's anything that is unusually different now than any other time in history. I mean, we can watch older movies and isolate scenes and moments that are arguably just as effective on kids today as they were back then. It's just that they're not necessarily exposed to those. Like the 1964, 1963 version of The Haunting is probably the scariest movie that I've ever seen. Black and white, very sort of subtle in terms of the visuals and just masterful filmmaking and sound design and act. And um, but I don't know that there's audience for black and white, you know, British that um today. And so um I think it's again just finding cool, new, fresh, ideas and then having really smart, thoughtful, creative filmmakers that are executing them in ways um that are effective. Zach Kreger's been killing it, right?
Totally.
There's a kid named Curry Barker who just had a movie called Obsession that played at TIFF and blew people's minds. There's, you know, uh, always a new crop of up and coming, auteurist horror directors, I think.
Do you see immersive formats like VR, interactive horror, or experiential storytelling as the next evolution of the genre, or do you think that traditional theatrical experience will continue to hold its weight as it has?
Both,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I definitely feel like the medium of cinema with all of the craft and all the different aspects of the medium are remains like the best sandbox to play in. I think that these things don't need to feel at all mutually exclusive. You can have like really interesting filmmakers. I mean, my point is if you get an interesting filmmaker who wants to play in the VR space and create something there, that could be amazing. Um, but there are levels to this stuff. And so you need the craftsman behind it. And then the medium, look, there are books that are incredibly frightening. There are movies, there are TV shows. It's harder on TV. But the point is, horror is not so much about the medium, but about, again, the storytelling and the craft.
What are your thoughts on AI in filmmaking? Do you think that there's any use of it that could be ethical, or do you think it's a detriment to the art form ultimately?
The former, I think there are definitely uses for it. I think that um, my own instinct is to not is to allow for new technology to take us to new places. I think, you know, there should be some sense of responsibility in the way that it's used, but we should also be excited to embrace it. I'm seeing a lot of I, AI artists creating amazing things, and I don't for one second feel like that's the technology, but the person behind the technology. And maybe I'm naive about it. I probably am. Um, but I find it rather exciting.
So producing horror means constantly dealing with fear, trauma, and the darker side of humanity. Has working so long in the genre changed the way you view fear in your own life or what you're afraid of?
I've always felt like working in the genre, like it's sort of satisfied something in me, a desire to kind of get close to issues and fears surrounding mortality. Somebody once said, horror is a bounded experience of fear, and meaning fictional horror. So, we go see these movies knowing that they are just movies and that this isn't really happening to us. And so it's sort of arguably a safe way to vicariously put yourself through some kind of a test, or again, force yourself to confront things that are all around us that in everyday life we try to repress or ignore. So it serves that function, but it's also true that I don't I rarely make or work on horror movies that are like war themed or that come too close to real life horror because I don't fuck with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little too close to home. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not interested in horror in terms of like focusing on the pain and suffering of real people that are going through it. And that's not what interests me. I'm interested in the emotion of horror per se, how how a movie in particular can make us feel this very specific, very intense psycho physiological response, how it can engender that in people. That I just find endlessly interesting. Um, but the pain and suffering part, which is what real life horror is, sort of that's what it's really about, is the aftermath. That stuff is not has it's never I've never been confused about how that's very different than what I'm doing for a living.
You've worked on so many projects across different budgets and scales. Which of those projects has meant the most to you personally, and why is that?
The ones that I feel closest to are probably the ones have that were either the hardest to make or where I had the most creative participation. So I can think off the top of my head the second Paranormal Activity movie I did a lot of work on, for better or for worse, and really got deep into it. Um, a movie called His House, I also was able to really kind of get in the middle of that at some point. Um, there's a movie, Strange Darling, that came out a couple years ago where it was a very challenging shoot. Um, and it just meant that the movie coming out and being successful in its own way made it infinitely sweeter that it was so hard, to get finished. And there are a few others like that, but overall, I feel very fortunate, even blessed, that there are not many movies on my resume that I don't love in their own way. You know what I mean? There are a couple that um, probably, you know, I could probably do without, but for the most part, I feel very strongly about all of them.
I think that's natural for any artist or anybody involved in the creative process that you're going to have some that are not as,
Yes.
yeah, you don't necessarily love as much, but yeah, that's good. Okay, so finally, if you could only be remembered for one contribution to horror cinema, what would you hope that would be?
That I was someone who championed new filmmakers and wanted to take risks and bet on artists. And yeah, I think giving people opportunities, I would love to be remembered for that. That's pretty cool.
That would be an incredible legacy, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. It's going to
Trevor,
be,
amazing. Thank you for being so prepared and for doing all that homework and for your thoughtful questions, man. I'm really impressed and appreciate it.
oh, wow, thank you. I really appreciate that so much. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on next month's episode of Center Stage.